Hi, boys and girls. Tonight we have with us my other cat, Trick or Treat. She is very interested in our story tonight, Whooping Cranes in Danger. On to the story.
Whooping Cranes in Danger by Susan E. Goodman. There are many types of heroes. Superheroes in comics catch bad guys. Astronauts risk their lives to explore space. Doctors devote their careers to finding cures for dreadful diseases. Our story has heroes too. Scientists and their helpers are saving the whooping cranes. Hoopers need help. Long ago, whooping cranes lived all over North America. Then people started hunting them. Farmers and builders took over the marshes these birds called home. Hoopers were losing the resources they needed. By 1941, only 15 whooping cranes were left in the wild. It looked as if they could die out forever. Some people refused to let this happen. The government reserved land for these cranes to live on. Hunters could not enter this wildlife refuge. Scientists guarded this tiny flock in Texas. 70 years later, its population has grown to 200 birds. But one flock is not enough. A disease or storm could wipe it out completely. Scientists decided to create a new flock in Wisconsin. Two groups of birds are safer than one. Without places to get food and raise families, the whooping crane could not survive. A tough problem. Building a new flock of hoopers is harder than it seems. These cranes are born up north. Then they migrate south in fall to avoid the cold winter. In spring they fly back north for the summer. Who says birds aren't smart? Scientists had a big problem to solve. They couldn't just grab some hoopers from the first flock to start a new one. When returning north, adult birds will only go back to the place they were born. So all members of the second flock had to be born in the new spot. How could that happen? Who would their parents be? A clever solution. 11 eggs were about to hatch in spring of 2001. Their parents were ready to welcome these chicks to the world. Their puppet parents, that is. This puppet takes the place of this whooping crane chick's mother. Scientists had to raise the chicks, but the hoopers weren't supposed to get used to people. The birds needed to be wild to stay safe, so humans pretended to be whooping cranes. They wore white costumes to hide their faces and bodies. They wore puppets on their arms to deal with the chicks. The caretakers never spoke near the birds. They talked to the chicks by playing tapes of real whooping cranes. They also had real hoopers in the refuge. The chicks needed to know what actual grown-up whooping cranes look like. Caretakers used the puppets to teach the chicks the same skills that real parents would. The puppets showed them where to swim and where to sleep. They even taught the chicks how to get along with other cranes. The puppets could teach most things, but they couldn't teach the chicks how to fly. Scientists use puppets to train the babies how to eat and drink, and where to find the right kind of food. The biggest parent of them all. Pilots of ultralight planes could do the job. They put on their costumes and got to work. At first, the plane just rolled across the ground. A pilot played a special crane call, which meant, "Come on, follow me." That's exactly what the chicks did. Of course, the treats given out by the pilot's puppet helped a lot. As days passed, the plane sped up. The chicks did too. Flapping their wings helped them go faster. It also made their wings stronger. At last they ran fast enough and flapped hard enough. And up they went. Soon the cranes were flying almost every day. They had to. Fall was coming. They had to be strong enough to migrate more than 1,200 miles to Florida. The Hoopers learned to follow the ultralight on the ground and in the air. They had to learn to recognize their Wisconsin home from the air because the plane would not lead them back the next spring. Operation Migration. Finally, the big day came. This experiment started with 11 eggs. 2 chicks had gotten sick and died. One couldn't fly well and moved to a zoo. The other 8 hoopers were ready to go. 2 ultralights revved their engines. One would lead the birds. The other would track down cranes that strayed from their flock. The planes took off. The birds did too. They were on their way. Planes and birds were only part of the migration. A crew drove south, too. The birds had to eat and rest each night. Scientists had chosen safe places along the way. The crew rushed ahead to set up pens for them to stay in. This ultralight plane led the whooping cranes to their winter home in Florida. The trip was hard. The cranes flew up to 95 miles on good days, only 20 on bad ones. Often rain or wind kept them from flying at all. One sad night, a giant storm ripped their pen apart. Caretakers spent hours searching and calling for the hoopers. All were fine except one. He had flown into a power line and died. After 48 days, the plane flew over the birds' winter home in Florida. A caretaker on the ground played the whooping crane call. The hoopers swooped in for a landing. The first part of the journey was a success. This map shows where the whooping cranes flew when they migrated. A warm winter. What was one of the first things the hoopers learned about Florida? Crabs are delicious. The shells were hard, but the meat was soft. Puppet parents helped the hoopers learn to peck them apart. At first, the cranes stayed in a pen as big as a football field. It even had a pond with a fake hooper parent in it to make them feel safe. Actually, they were safer in the pond. Cranes usually sleep in the water at night. Splashing sounds warn them if a predator is nearby. In time, caretakers took the top off the pen. The cranes flew out to explore more of their new home. Caretakers hid, watching them enjoy yummy shrimp and snails. Generally, the hoopers returned to the pen at night. Sometimes they didn't. 2 cranes were killed by bobcats. Now there were 5. The hoopers learned to eat new foods, such as crabs, in their winter home in Florida. In the spring, the birds started eating more. That was a good sign. They were storing energy for a trip north. Still, the scientists wondered, would the cranes know when to leave? Homeward bound? One day, caretakers heard radio signals. The cranes had leg bands that sent out these sounds. The hoopers were on the move. Caretakers jumped in 2 trucks to follow the signals. They had to hurry. The trip home would be much faster. Air has currents just like water does. Birds ride these currents the same way that surfers ride waves. The cranes traveled more than 200 miles the very first day. They were headed north. But would they remember their route? Soon scientists had another thing to worry about. One crane left the group. A truck turned to track her. Where was she going and why? Scientists wondered if the hoopers would know when to fly north to Wisconsin. Day by day, the cranes kept flying. Then the group of 4 reached Lake Michigan. They began to circle. Oh no, thought the trackers. They do not know which way to go. The hoopers kept circling around and around. After 2 hours, they finally turned west. They were on course. 11 days after leaving Florida, these 4 cranes came in for a landing. They were very close to the pen they grew up in. What about the last crane? She ended up visiting a flock of sandhill cranes for a while. Sandhill cranes are relatives of whooping cranes. 2 weeks later, she came back home to the refuge. The number of whooping cranes is beginning to grow again. A new beginning. This first migration was finished, but the whooping crane's recovery had just begun. The next year, these 5 cranes flew south by themselves. The ultralights were busy leading 16 new chicks. The planes still led migrations each fall, but now whooping crane's parents are leading their own chicks down south. Some of these chicks have grown up enough to have babies of their own. The whooping crane is still threatened. It remains one of America's most endangered birds, but scientists are hopeful. Luckily, the flock keeps getting bigger.
What'd you think, Trick or Treat? Did you like the story? I sure did. So remember, boys and girls, always do your very best and be kind to each other. See you tomorrow. I almost forgot the shout outs. Shout out goes to Tailante and to Iviana, 2 kids who are always trying to help me. I appreciate you guys.